What's up, college football fans? It's your favorite college football show, First and Long. We are here breaking down I guess, really our top 35 teams that me and Mason are feeling like are going to have the most effect on the 2024 national champion. We're so glad that you're here. We hope that you'll hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, help us out with that stuff. Mason, how are you today, man? This has been a pretty fun series that we've been putting together here. And as we sit about 43 days or so, depending on when you watch this video, we're about 43 days out from college football kickoff. How you feeling? Are you ready to talk some Husky football?
Man, it's never a bad day to talk Husky football, right? But yeah, I'm doing good. Like you said, we're about 6 weeks away from football, and so
Mm.
it's an exciting time for an exciting season for 2024. I don't know that I've ever been more excited for a season. It seems like now, other than when we went from the BCS era to the college football playoff era, I don't know that there's been a more exciting time for college football than heading into 2024. So there are a lot of teams excited about that, which is why we've got 35 teams that we're previewing for the 2024 season. And we're happy to do Washington here at number 27.
Well, it seems like we've talked a lot about the Washington Huskies, and that's because we have. You can
Mhm.
go back all through last season, and Washington was on our mind a lot. And
Well, you are the only person in the college football space that picked Washington to go to the national championship at this time last year. So,
toot that horn, baby.
I mean, or you had them facing Georgia and losing, but
Yeah.
who can blame you with the sign behind you?
You know what? Hey, I fully stand behind it. I still think Georgia was one of the best teams, but I digress. That's all in the history books at this point. But um, you know, Washington was a team that really stuck out to me last year, and before the season even began, as you said, they were a prediction of mine to go to the national championship, and it was because of Kalen DeBoer and the success that he had the year before, and only losing 2 games. And I saw that Michael Penix was coming back, and just seemed like that team had a lot of swagger. And boy, call it lucky, call it a shot in the dark, a blind squirrel getting a nut. I don't know what you want to call it, but the problem is, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's around to hear it, did it actually make any noise?
Yeah.
And we were such a young show at that point. No, I don't even. Most of our people that follow the show at this point weren't even watching at that point. So,
No. No.
it's.
It
I'll
was
be lucky
funny.
if I get a pick like that again this year, right?
Right, yeah. I'll be putting some money down if you're hot on a Indiana next year, going into next year, I'll be dropping some money on them. But no, it was funny because none of our we've got we have a pretty good Washington following actually on the show. We really
Hmm.
appreciate y'all's support. But when you were making those predictions early on, we were a young, uh, you know, spring chicken of a college football show at the time. So none of those Washington fans heard it up
Hmm.
until later, and then we became critical. You became critical as well of Washington, and that's what the Washington fans heard, and they took that, and that was their only.
They took
Um,
umbrage with it for sure.
that's right. We had to kind of backpedal and trace our footsteps there a little bit, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, great season last year. But that's all behind us.
Well, that's why we're doing this series, and this is our countdown to the season, as we said. And you're going to see a collection of these videos. Look, we're not saying that Washington is the 27th ranked team in the country. They're just number 27 on this list. We got to figure out who's ranked where, and we're gonna put out a ranking before the season gets started after we get all these videos done, and we know what we think we need to know about each one of these teams. And so that's what we're here to do today, and we're so glad that you're here with us. And whether you're a Washington fan or just a college football fanatic, we hope that you will join us. Hit that subscribe button, as I said, and we're gonna have the content coming all season long. But Mason, let's dive into the Washington Huskies. As we said, very successful season last year, national title game loss Kalen DeBoer moves on to Alabama, obviously, and Washington does a fantastic job filling the void. I thought Alabama did a great job getting Kalen DeBoer, and I thought Washington did a great job going and getting Jedd Fisch. Jedd Fisch was a name that was really hot after a really successful season for the Arizona Wildcats last season, and not a ton of head coaching experience for Jedd Fisch, but that second year at Arizona things were really, really popping and caught the attention of a lot of people. And I think he was a hot name, and I think it was a really, really good hire. A guy that's got a lot of NFL acumen, and he brings some NFL guys with him to come and coach this team. What do you think about the hire of Jedd Fisch?
Yeah, some Washington fans feel like they got an upgrade at head coach from Kalen DeBoer, and um, it's easy to argue that, I guess. But ultimately, if you're really into the X's and O's of college football, you can see why, right? This is a guy who came over from the NFL, like you said, brought some NFL concepts, and it a lot of NFL coaches now are going back and looking at his offensive schemes and his concepts as well. A lot of just coaches in general, all over the sport, are looking at Jedd Fisch and what he did as an offensive coordinator, what he continues to do, and it's very impressive to think that this guy's kind of, um, you know, changing offensive schemes. Similar to not I don't want to say he's had the same impact, but similar to the Pirate, right? And what we saw from Mike Leach, and how a lot of offensive minds are gravitated towards his concepts right now. But Jedd Fisch is a guy who, some people don't realize this, but was a high school coach and then went and coached in arena football in 1998. And while he was at the University of Florida, though, he was constantly, as a student, he was constantly leaving sticky pad notes um, on Spurrier's, who was the head coach at the time, was leaving it on his car. He found his car while Spurrier was at practice, and he was leaving sticky notes on his car saying like, "Hey, I really want to come, be a grad assistant, and all that." And it ended up eventually getting his attention, and Spurrier ended up hiring him as a grad assistant. Spent a couple years with Florida, and then was off to the NFL as a quality control analyst, and eventually ended up being an offensive coordinator at Miami, and then at Jacksonville. So the rest was history. But he was persistent in getting to that position, which is kind of a fun story.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, he's bringing in some names. Look, Steve Belichick is a name that you're going to obviously relate to his dad, who's pictured there on the screen. But Steven was a coach with the Patriots for, gosh, what was it, 8 years, 10 years? I mean, he's been around that. He won 3 Super Bowls with the Patriots as a coach, but he was never the defensive coordinator. So that is a concern for me, Mason. I'm not going to lie to you. Now, I'm not saying that this can't work out. I'm just saying that this is an obvious risk. Bringing in a guy who's never been a defensive coordinator, I'd like to think that a guy like Jedd Fisch, who idolized a guy like Steve Spurrier, is an offensive-minded guy, and I think I'd be correct in assuming that. Um, I've just got questions. I don't know the answers to Belichick being the defensive coordinator. I don't know how this is going to work out, but this is obviously a guy who knows football. We know that to be a fact, and there's a reason that Jedd Fisch is attracted, to this guy being his defensive coordinator. So, I've got faith in Jedd Fisch that he's going to make the right decisions for this football team day in and day out. We'll see about Belichick. I think the jury's still out, but definitely a good name and a guy who has been around a lot of football and a lot of NFL guys. So it'll be interesting to see how he takes this group. This is going to be the least talented group of defenders that he's worked with, well, no doubt. So what can he do with less? Because Washington is obviously in a transition year. What do you think about
Yeah.
Belichick?
Yeah, I think with Belichick, the name obviously stands out. You can't look at him and his name and think, well, he's going to be a successful defensive coordinator. That alone doesn't exactly lead to proven results directly. However, he is a Belichick, right? So
Yeah.
it carries some weight, but there's a caveat when you look at his resume. So straight out of college in 2011, where he played lacrosse for the Rutgers and was also a long snapper. From graduating in 2011, he went straight to the New England Patriots as a defensive assistant from 2012 to 2015, and then was a safeties coach, DB coach, and outside linebackers coach. So he's been all around the defense as an assistant. And like you said, at 37, he gets his first shot as a defensive coordinator. We're going to have to wait and see kind of what he's able to produce. Like you said, with less on the roster, he's a piece of this rebuild, right? He's given a shot as a pretty young coach, and I think it's probably going to pay out or play out in a way that Washington feels pretty good about their defensive coordinator of the future. And I think it's also important to point out that Bill Belichick is unemployed right now. So to think that he may have his hands in helping a little bit with his son, at least behind the scenes. I'm not saying he'll be out there on the field or anything like that, but just being in his son's ear and being someone that Steve can rely on, I think is probably pretty fair to assume.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And any help is welcomed because, as we said, this is a transition year. And look, I will say this about this team: you know, 20 of 22 starters are gone, and we're going to go over some of those numbers and what the offense and the defense looks like separately here in just a minute. But um, if there is one side of the ball that returns more talent than the other, or more reps at least, it's the defense. You know, there are pieces that have played specifically in the secondary. We're going to get into that in just a second, but before we do, let's talk about the guy on the other side of the ball, Brendan Carroll. Brennan Carroll, excuse me. I want to call him Brendan for some reason. But came over from Arizona, and look, that's going to be a common trend as we go through a bunch of these slides. There, I mean, Jedd Fisch, when he left Arizona, he brought the kitchen sink with him, and that's something that we've seen happen a whole lot when in this transfer portal era. Coaches always have tended to bring coaches along with them whenever they're making lateral or up movements in coaching programs, but the amount of players that followed these guys was pretty remarkable as well. So definitely got a lot of players with confidence in this group. But one thing that kind of stuck out to me, Mason, was the fact that Brendan Carroll is not only the offensive coordinator, but he's going to be the offensive line coach.
Mhm.
Now, it's pretty often that we see an offensive coordinator coach a position group. A lot of times, quarterbacks. A lot of the time. But I feel like it's kind of uncommon to see an offensive coordinator come in and coach the offensive line as well. Now, something that I noted before, Jedd Fisch is an offensive guy and obviously going to have his hand in this offense. So thought that was kind of interesting. Brendan Carroll should be a good addition. He's a guy that's been in the NFL. He cut his teeth at USC as a grad assistant. Uh, Obviously a guy that has been around, I think, a little bit more than the defensive coordinator Belichick. This guy's got some experience, and for all intents and purposes, I feel like it was a pretty good hire.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is the number one coach in the Jedd Fisch coaching tree, right? And so he's kind of his right hand man in a lot of ways, and he's going to bring over some consistency and some continuity in the coaching structure with Jedd Fisch, and was also the offensive line coach and coordinator at Arizona for the past 3 seasons. So I think bringing him over is going to be really essential. He's sort of the Ryan Grubb to Kalen DeBoer as he is to Jedd Fisch. So a very important hire, I think.
Yeah, Washington fans, let us know what you think about the hires. I'm pretty interested to see whatever. I feel like all the Washington fans, I feel like everybody's been kind of quiet. It's been choppy waters for Washington fans alike out there because I mean, there's just been so much turnover and I won't say turmoil, but just a change of the regime. It can be a lot, and I know fans were kind of bummed after a national championship loss. And then on top of that, just your whole team's gone. But there are some things to gleam on, and let's start on the offense with some of these notable returners. One guy that I am extremely high on, Mason, is Denzel Boston, and I think it was a fantastic thing for Washington to be able to retain this guy. Great size, and apparently they were saying on the broadcast of the spring game that I was watching that he's got 4.4 speed. So 4.4 speed with that frame sounds pretty familiar to a couple of guys that they had last year. But we all know that Odunze, Polk, and McMillan, they're all gone. So Denzel Boston, I think, for all intents and purposes, is going to be your number one bell cow wide receiver. Daniel Ngata, running back that comes back, I think he's going to be a piece that is going to be much needed on this offense. A guy that's got some reps and some experience, and then Giles Jackson coming back at wide receiver. But look, Mason, it's no secret this Washington team is ranked number 130 out of 134 teams as far as returning production. So searching for answers at this point. None of these guys were, I don't think, necessarily starters last year, but all of these guys got some playing time. And definitely, as far as Denzel Boston goes, I know that he's a sure thing. If he can stay healthy, he's going to produce. I've seen that. As I watched the spring game, and I've seen enough. I know he's going to be productive in the Big Ten. But searching for answers on offense, Mason, I think we're just going to have to kind of wait and see with these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And other than Ngata, it's important to note that Jackson and Boston both have a ton of eligibility left. So I think you mentioned that the size and speed of Boston, Jackson as well, punt returner. And so I think you're getting some pretty good pieces, but 19% of Washington's offense returns as far as production goes. So it's tough. You can't really point to stats when you're looking at these players, but ultimately I do think that they will be important pieces of this offense in some way.
Yeah, definitely. Look, as any team that's going through coaching changes, a full-on regime change, we have to go to the old trusty transfer portal, and we'll just kind of have to go through this stuff position group by position group here the best we can. But Mason, we'd be remiss if we didn't start with the quarterback, of course, on this offense. And for me, it looks like Will Rogers is going to be that guy, and at least for day one. Now, could things change? Sure, I think they could change because you got a guy named Damon Williams, who I think has got all the tools minus God-given ability. He's not a tall fella, and we saw a couple batted balls in that spring game, and I think it was kind of a result of that. But nevertheless, this guy was very Bryce Young-esque from what I could tell. And look, I know he's not necessarily going against the 85 Chicago Bears out there on defense in the spring game, but I think that there is optimism as far as a young guy, and then you've got your experienced guy from Will Rogers who owns a bunch of SEC records, more of a game manager type, not necessarily a guy who's going to be able to put through a piece of plywood or anything, but he knows the game of football, and it looks like he's picking it up pretty quickly, at least with they say with the verbiage and play design and things like that. So I think you've got a little bit of the old and a little bit of the new. Maybe they can figure out a way to get Damon Williams on the field, by the end of the season or with some packages early on.
Yeah, Williams is a guy who came out of the state of Arizona, so someone that Jedd Fisch recruited heavily to play at Arizona. And then, of course, when he goes to Washington, he is in his ear as well and says, "Hey, we've got an opportunity here in the Big Ten for you to come in and play really in 2025 and beyond." Who better to play behind than Will Rogers, who brings a ton of experience and a ton of stats playing in that Mike Leach offense, which we kind of mentioned earlier. But hey, Will Rogers, I think is going to do really well. He coming from Mississippi State now comes over to Washington, and we talk about all of the turnover in this offense. This is still probably the most talented offense that Will Rogers has been a part of. He's got more weapons than he did at Mississippi State in a lot of ways. So I'm excited to see what Will Rogers does. But there's an all new offensive line that he's playing behind. So I think it's important to note that he's only going to be as successful as this offensive line is, and that's a big question for an O line that won the Joe Moore Award last year, but lost all 5 of their starters.
And that's why I say that the Damon Williams factor has to be considered at some point, because look, this offensive line, like you said, it's all new. It's all new everything, and you can see Drew as a party was uh, one of the top transfer guys that Washington brought in the offseason. We got to see him in the spring game, and he does look good. He looks as advertised, and I think that's a nice piece. I'm still a little lost on who's going to be the other offensive tackle. Your starter. We'll just kind of have to see how that goes. But let's kind of fast forward through the transfer edition slides here, and you can kind of see I put all the offensive linemen at the end of this thing. I wanted to kind of stack them together the best I could, but you got some guys to pull from. I mean, you went and got some guys, no doubt about it. So I am, I'm optimistic. The amount of bodies that were brought in. A couple of those guys were brought in the spring. You see Vamahi coming over from Ohio State. That was a post-spring addition there. D'Angelo Tatali, something like that. That was a spring addition. Logan Sagapula. These guys, I don't name them, but I just mispronounce them on YouTube. Those are all guys that are going to contribute this year, Mason. They're going to have to. But going back to my point with Damon Williams, maybe this guy gives you a different element than Will Rogers does. Will Rogers is not very fleet of foot. He's not a guy that you're going to want getting hit a whole lot, and I'm not saying you want that out of Damon Williams. He's small in stature, so but he does have that ability to take off with his feet, and he seems like he has a pretty inept ability to run the football. So something to think about, and that kind of takes us through our offensive line as well. It's a mix and mash. What do you got anything to add to this offensive line? Look, it didn't look stellar in the spring game, and a lot of some of those guys I just named, they weren't there. So we're just gonna have to kind of wait till fall camp and see who emerges, and hope that some guys really kind of separate themselves as those day one starters.
Yeah, it's tough to project offensive linemen who have no stats, and that's
Mm-hmm.
really what you've got is um, a bunch of guys outside of as a party who haven't had any snaps for the most part. Even Vamahi coming over from Ohio State as a grad transfer, this is his 5th season playing football, but he only played in 23 games in 4 seasons thus
Yeah.
far, and played for an offensive line that definitely leaves some room to be desired for Ohio State over the past couple of seasons. So, not he obviously wasn't going to be a starter at Ohio State, which is why he transfers to Washington to get some playing time. But, this isn't a plug and play player either. He's pretty unproven himself. Outside of him, you've got a ton of young talent. As a party redshirt sophomore, you've got a redshirt junior in Memolar. You've got a sophomore in Hatchett who's projected to play center.
And those two guys are returners. I didn't name them, but they are returners. But they've dealt with injuries. I mean, they
not a ton of snaps either way.
Yeah,
yeah, but some youth, and so then you've got on the left side, you've got projected starter Fasolo, who's a redshirt freshman, and Tafai, who's also a redshirt freshman. So something that this is an offensive line that you can probably build on. And I'm sure that's, those are the five that I mentioned that are on the depth chart to start right now. It may not be when it's all said and done, but point is, this is a team that and an offensive line unit that is building for the future, right? They're going to get in and figure some things out this year. And then 2025, 2026, by 2026, you're probably going to have a pretty veteran group of offensive linemen, but are they talented enough in their youth to come in and play and be effective right away? We're going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Right now, honestly, not right now because it's been addressed since, but when Jedd Fisch took over, there were only 49 scholarship players on the roster. So the first priority was fill spots.
Yeah.
And he's done a really good job. Doing that. Are they all the guys that he wants, that he envisions, at the roster that he's going to have at Washington? No, this isn't the best roster, Jedd Fisch is going to have. There's no doubt about that, but they have done a remarkable job getting the roster filled out nonetheless. And, we'll just have to wait and see. It doesn't mean that it's going to all be bad. I think there's going to be some good spots, and there's going to be a lot of improvement made between now and kickoff and between now and like halfway through that season. So, we'll kind of go through the schedule here at the end of the video and talk about what's coming up in that new Big Ten schedule. Very exciting stuff. But before we do that, let's talk about running back real quick. So bring a guy in, Jonah Coleman. As you can see, his beautiful smile there that he did for his picture. That was pretty funny. I had to laugh at that. Look, I really like this guy, Adam Muhammad, Mason. This guy's a freshman. He didn't play at Arizona. He was a guy who enrolled at Arizona and then ended up transferring over to Washington. He never played a snap over there. Freshman, as I said, man, he looks strong. He runs with some authority, and I think that is going to be much needed. I mean, every offense needs a thumper. And this guy, for all intents and purposes, even being 18 years old, man, he looks like a thumper. Jordan Washington comes over from Arizona. We mentioned Ngata earlier. I think this is a pretty good running back room as long as, you can keep those top 3-4 guys, somewhat healthy. Running backs don't stay healthy all year. Not one of them does. Everybody gets dinged up, but if you can keep those 4 guys rotating and on the field, especially top 3, I think that's a pretty good running back room.
Yeah, and one that we haven't mentioned yet is Cam Davis, who is a redshirt senior, battled injury last year, but he's a guy that Washington fans know and know that when he is playing, he can produce. So you've got a good little mix there of this is one position group at least that has some experience and has some talent. And I think that they're going to be leaned on pretty heavily this year if the offensive line can hold up and they can create some holes for this team, for this unit. You've got really 5 running backs that you've got to feel pretty good about. 2 of those being, freshmen, true freshmen, but ultimately, I think this is a pretty talented group. Probably the maybe outside of quarterback could possibly be the most talented group on this offensive line unit.
Yeah. Cameron Davis, as you said, is back, over 900 yards of offense in his career. So he is a guy that's got some reps, but as you said, has kind of had some issues with injury. We'll have to see how he holds up throughout the 24 season. Um, we'll talk about wide receiver real quick. We kind of talked about McMillan, Odunze, and Polk. Excuse me, being gone. We talked about Denzel Boston. I think that's your number one wide receiver. Jeremiah Hunter transfers over from California. Um, let's see where he's listed. Oh, I guess he's not listed on here. But he was a transfer over from Cal. Watched him in the spring game. I liked everything that I saw from him. I think he's going to be in your top three as far as wide receivers and production. And then we talked about Giles Jackson coming back. He was injured a little bit last year, but I'm thinking that he's going to have a big year, and I'm thinking that's probably going to be your top three wide receivers. There was one other transfer over, and I'm trying to remember who it was. Oh, Audric Harris comes over from Arizona. I don't think that's a guy that has a ton of experience, but it is another talented guy coming over from Arizona. That, as I said, you can see there's four guys just on your screen right there coming over from Arizona. One of many of the players that have followed Jedd Fisch. What do you think about the wide receiver unit? I think that's a good first group. I'm a little bit concerned as far as the depth goes. What do you think about the receiver unit?
I think it's a pretty good group of talented guys. You know, Jeremiah Hunter was Cal's leading receiver for the past 2 seasons, and figures to be really the number one receiver, playing the X position for Washington. I know you mentioned Boston and him, you know, being probably more talented than Hunter, but Hunter brings in the experience and the playing time. I know as Washington fans, you were really hoping to get McMillan over from Arizona as well. That didn't come to fruition. So, you know, him and Fafita decide to stay put at Arizona. But ultimately, I do think that Hunter's a great addition, and you've got some talent there in the wide receiver room. It's just a matter of getting them some snaps, getting them some reps, and seeing what they produce on the field.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Let's jump over to the defense and Carson Bruner is 100% the go-to guy on this defense. And the reason I know that is because in the spring game, they're letting him throw passes, they're letting him kick field goals, they're letting this guy just do whatever he wants to do out there. This is clearly the leader of the defense. So obviously, it's going to be notable whenever he's making his return. I think that that's obviously a big thing. Big thing for the Washington Huskies. Thaddeus Dixon, Elijah Jackson, a couple of guys that are making their return and got a lot of they've got a lot of game experience. They've got reps and snaps. They not a ton, but they played last year. All these guys played last year. Pretty much throughout the season in secondary and third string roles. Look, anything you can return from a national championship team, guys that have really honestly seen it all, played a 15 game schedule last year. I think that's huge for your team. And honestly, Mason, I think this is going to be a pretty good secondary. What do you think about the defense? We talked about Belichick taking over. Do you think he's going to be able to mold a pretty decent defense out of this? I think there's some pieces here. I think it's going to kind of be up to the defensive line and what they can do. What do you
Mhm.
think about it?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you know, the defensive side of the football does return more talent than the offensive side. 50% of their production comes back. So you feel pretty good about that. That's not a great number, but you do have some pieces to work with there. You know, mainly like you said, Carson Bruner being the glue of this defense. Getting him to come back was a huge addition, and then also his counterpart, his other inside linebacker, Tupu Talu, Tupatala. He's also coming back, so that's a big addition as well. Redshirt senior, so a lot of experience coming there as well. And the cornerback Jackson, like you mentioned, coming back, but then also Ephesians Priceout coming over from Arizona to play the opposite side at cornerback. He's a 6'4" cornerback, and big guy. Last year I think he had 60 tackles for Arizona, which is a lot for a cornerback. That was
Yeah.
good for fourth on the team. And then also another transfer that I want to point out that I think a lot of people may not really pay much attention to, but you mentioned the defensive line being a question. Valdez coming over from, let's see, who was that? Uh, it was a FCS team, anyways, that Valdez came over from. Um, but he's a
Was it
guy who comes
Charlotte?
in.
I don't know.
It wasn't Charlotte. Let me see. This was Montana State.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
But comes over from Montana State FCS program and had 84 total tackles the past 2 seasons, 18 and a half tackles for a loss, 12 and a half sacks in the past 2 seasons, which as a nose guard, that's insane.
Yeah.
That's a lot of production for an interior defensive lineman. You're talking Warren Sapp type numbers. For a guy who now Warren Sapp didn't play FCS football, but point is this guy's been productive in his time so far as a collegiate athlete, and I think that you can feel pretty good about the talent that you're bringing in Valdez in the center of that defense there. Another defensive lineman that comes over from Arizona, Isaiah Ward, he's going to come in and play defensive end. I think that's a notable addition as well. Um, but but yeah, you mentioned it. The cornerbacks, or excuse me, the defensive backs in general, I do feel pretty good about. You also bring back strong safety Fabikulainen, and I think that's a huge addition as well, and or a huge point on this defense to bring him back. So ultimately, I'm with you. I do feel pretty good about this defense. Um, let's see kind of what Belichick is able to do and bring in, and if the players are able to pick up the scheme quick enough, I think that they've got the talent there to be a at least an average, middle of the pack Big Ten defense, which is pretty good considering that the Big Ten's a defensive heavy league.
Yeah, absolutely. The lines of scrimmage are just going to be super super important as you make this transition over into the Big Ten. I think there was a lot of, and I'm not look, I'm not ragging on Washington at all, but some of the things that you could get away with last year, as far as you know, defensive line, especially. I thought the offensive line for Washington ended up being pretty damn good last year, but the defensive line was a little bit of a question mark, and it was part of the reason that there was a few games at the end of the season where I'm like, all right, is this group going to hold up? Um, it's going to be oh so important as you go into the Big Ten and play a Big Ten schedule. You mentioned Sebastian Valdez. That is a big get. I think we'll see how he transitions over, to playing some big boy football after playing at Montana State, but obviously has got the motor and the stats to back it up. Look, Washington fans are super excited about Zach Durfee, a guy that transferred over last year. His transfer was denied by the NCAA. Boo, right? But we're gonna actually get to see him play, and that's gonna be fun on the defensive line. You bring back a guy like Lance Holtzclaw. Played in 10 games last year. Didn't get a ton of reps, but he played in 10 games. Maurice Himes played in all 15 games in 2023. He's an edge rusher. He'll be back. And Javon Parker, I think, is going to be the guy that kind of accents Sebastian Valdez. He's the large guy for the middle of the defense, over 300 pounds. That's going to be super important. That's something I always go and look for, Mason, especially when you're playing in the Big Ten or the SEC. Do you have 300-pound guys in the middle of that defense? Because if you don't, it may be an issue. You got to be able to clog up the center of that offensive line and take up holes. Bring in Russell Davis over from Arizona, Jaden Wayne over from Miami, a couple of edge guys. It could end up being a good group, but we just got to see what Coach Belichick can do as far as getting these guys ready to play big time football. Let's jump over into the schedule, man. And this is going to be fun. This is one of the things that I'm looking most forward to for the 2024-25 season is seeing these teams in their new respective conferences. Oklahoma, Texas heading to SEC. Bunch of teams headed to the Big 12 or kind of, heading out of the Big 12, I guess I should say as well. the Big Ten is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be really, really interesting. I think going to be kind of a clash of cultures, if you will, for a lot of these road games that you're going to go check out. The road games are the ones that are boxed in that little golden box there. So you've got road games at Rutgers, Iowa, Indiana, Penn State, and Oregon. Um, One of the first things that pops out whenever you look at the schedule, and one of the first things that we talked about, you miss Ohio State, right? That first year, and I don't think that can be a bad thing at all, because I think Ohio State is definitely a top 5 team in the country, no doubt about it. And I feel like I can say that with confidence way before the season has started. Um, what do you think about the schedule? It starts off pretty easy. You got the Apple Cup week 3. That's always a game that, rivalry games, you just never know. I for all intents and purposes, Washington ought to beat the brakes off of them, but it is a rivalry game. Then you pick up your Big Ten schedule. What are your thoughts on this one, Mason?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it starting off with the non-cons. Pretty easy non-cons for the most part, outside of your Apple Cup. That was a fun game last year. It's always an exciting game and could go either way. I do give Washington a slight edge in that. And I think that that's going to be the game that the team circles and says, okay, let's see what we're made of, right? In week 3. It could really boost the confidence of this team heading into the Northwestern game when they start Big Ten play. But ultimately, I do think that they start off 3-0, and then going and playing Northwestern, which look was a story of college football last year. I don't think that that's a pushover type game, which you probably would have been saying at the beginning of last year. But I still give Washington the slight edge. So real potential to start off 4-0 here, and even 5-0. With Rutgers going to Rutgers, this is a different Rutgers team than they were 2 seasons ago, even. But ultimately, that's another toss up game. So weeks 1 and 2, you're winning for sure. Weeks 3, 4, and 5. Look, those are 50-50 games in my opinion, but I think that you should be able to win 2 of those 3 games, right? I think they'll be favored in all 3 of those games. And then you've got Michigan coming to you. It does help that's a home game, but Michigan is going to be, their defense is still going to be one of the best in college football. Don't really know much about the offense and what Sherrone Moore is going to be able to do with that offense and behind presumably Alex Orji playing quarterback, but I think that the defense for Michigan is going to be a little bit too tough to handle for Washington. I've got that as a loss. Iowa, much the same, strong defense. We don't know what they're going to do on offense, but I mean, hey, if Washington can score about 27 points, I'd feel pretty good about them winning that game. But that's a tough team to go out and just assume you're going to score 27 points on. That's a really stingy defense. I've got that as a loss, especially being on the road in Iowa. Indiana, another toss-up game in my opinion. Could go either way, but yeah, I guess I would give Washington the slight edge to win that game. But it is on the road, which is notable for sure. SC is a game that if I'm looking at Washington saying like, what's going to be your marquee win this year, right? I look at South Carolina, the other USC. I look at at Southern Cal, and I say like, hey, if we can go out as a team and win that game, you feel pretty good about the season. So that's one that you've got to circle and really try to get the horses going. And at that point, we're several weeks into the season. Jedd Fisch should have seen some improvement in his football team, and at that point, that could be a game that they go out and get. Getting that game at home is very important as well. Penn State is going to be a loss. I've got Penn State as a playoff team this year in the new 12-team format. And then UCLA, look, that's a team that you've got to beat. They're undergoing more of a change than Washington is. They lost their head coach Chip Kelly to Ohio State late. So they weren't really able to recover from that as quickly as the program would have liked. So I've got UCLA as a win. And then you've got Oregon on the road. I don't see and Washington has had Oregon's number for the past, few seasons, really.
Yeah,
But
they have.
these are two different teams now. I think Oregon's not just a playoff contender, but a national championship contender. Oregon should be able to handle business at home against Washington in that game. So to me, and Vegas has the over under win total for Washington at 7. I do think that that's a little bit too high. I think that's kind of the ceiling on the season is 7 wins. When I break this down, you've got 50-50 games against Washington State, Northwestern, Rutgers, and Indiana. I, I don't want to say UCLA is a 50-50 game, but they could lose that game, right? So that's a 5 games right there that could go either way. If they're lucky, they'll win 3 of them, I guess. So to me, when I look at that, that's those 3 games that you win puts you at 5 wins on the season. I do think that Washington is going to be a bowl game, right? So they got, or a bowl team, excuse me. So they've got to get to 6 wins. I think they're going to be able to do that, but I think they fall short of the 7 wins that Vegas has them at. I definitely don't see 8 wins on this schedule right here. But if you had to, if I had to bet against the over under, I would say under for this team, and they're probably going to end up either at 6 or 7 wins on the season. Mark, I'm hoping that for the Washington fans' sake that you're a little bit more bullish on the team than I am. But ultimately, yeah, I would say 6 or 7 wins is probably what the season turns out.
I mean, I think starting out 3-0 is I think pretty much a given at this point. I think that 3-0 is pretty safe bet. But can you take care of Northwestern, who was not a half bad team last year after everybody thought they would be in the gutter completely. I think they won 7 games last year. Rutgers is a solid team. If you don't come out and play solid football, Rutgers will run the ball on you. And you know, Graciano's got a style of play there that I think really fits their level of talent. And so you got to be really, really careful on the road and, going all the way across the country. I mean, think about going from Seattle all the way to New York. Going to be long travels for this team several times throughout the season. Although they do pick up a couple of the other Western opponents that have moved over to the Big Ten, so that's helpful. But the first bye week, I think, helps a little bit. You can kind of break it up after you play Iowa. I think Iowa's going to be a tough team to go on the road and beat. They got a really solid defense, and they're just more than happy to sit back and let you make a mistake. And we'll have to see how. I think Will Rogers will come in handy in that game because that is a really, really tough defense. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, Mason, I agree with you. It's about Northwestern, Rutgers, Indiana, UCLA. You got to win those games. If you're wanting to hit that 7, you got to win those games, and it seems like Vegas is predicting them to win those games. So, if I had to bet, I'd bet under. But I think this number is set correctly at 7. My heart is saying 6. My head is saying 7. So, I'm going to stick with that. But this is one I'm staying away from because I think there is a potential, to hit 7, but I think that's the ceiling. We will have, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Washington fans, please let us know in the comment section how you feel about it. This is going to be a really, really exciting season for you guys. I know getting to see some of those Big Ten opponents. I hope that you'll get out to the stadium and see some of those opponents in person. That's going to be really, really exciting. If you haven't already done it, I hope you'll consider hitting the subscribe button. Keep following us for our countdown to number 1 and our countdown to the season. We're going to have a fantastic football season with tons of content, tons of cool things going on. We'll hope that you come join us. Mason and I would be very delighted if you did so. Thank you all so much for watching and have a great day.